He was 18, a wide receiver with a whole football season ahead of him. On the 4th of July, he went out on the water off the Mississippi coast with a group of friends. He never made it back the way he left. Tonight, 4 things are landing on the Nolan Wells case at once. The FBI has finally put its role in this investigation on the record, in writing. The young woman who may have spoken with Nolan in his last confirmed minutes has broken her silence. Not in a Facebook post, not through a relative, but face-to-face with his mother. Federal investigators have confirmed they're now working to stop serious threats being sent to people connected to this case. And just yesterday, in a church on the Mississippi coast, his family said their final goodbye. This is a true crime documentary look at what's actually confirmed in the Nolan Wells case, and what's still just rumor. If you're new here, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And subscribe, because this story is far from over. For nearly 2 weeks, the FBI's role in this case had been a rumor with no real shape. A name mentioned in passing, never explained. That changed this week. The FBI's Jackson field office finally addressed it directly, on paper, for the first time. The statement is careful, almost deliberately calm. It says the Bureau has lent tools and partnerships where useful, but that the Jackson County Sheriff's Office is running the investigation, has always run it, and will keep running it. It points to years of the 2 agencies working side by side, long before this case existed. And it closes by saying the FBI stands ready to do more, if doing more gets this family closer to an answer. Notice what that statement isn't. It isn't language announcing a breakthrough. It isn't the language of a takeover. It reads like an agency trying to lower the temperature on a question that had been feeding speculation for days. Because when federal agents show up and nobody explains why, people fill in that blank themselves. And the blank they fill in is rarely boring. Separately, the FBI confirmed to ABC News exactly why it's involved at all. It's working to stop interstate threats aimed at people connected to this case. For a threat to become a federal matter, it typically has to cross state lines. A message, a call, something sent from one state into another over channels like the internet. That's federal jurisdiction, regardless of how big or small the underlying case is. What the FBI hasn't done is say who received those threats, or what was said. Some people connected to the case have chosen to speak about it themselves. Nolan's friend Trace Eston Shepard told Good Morning America directly that he and others close to Nolan have been getting threats since this story went national. Beyond what people have volunteered publicly on their own, the specifics are staying vague, likely on purpose, since naming a target in an official statement tends to paint a bigger one on their back, not a smaller one. Up to now, everything attributed to Katie had come secondhand. A family friend relaying what she'd heard, then Katie's own mother, posting on Facebook just to shut down rumors that her daughter had gone missing too. This week, that changed. Christine says she's now heard Katie's account directly, in Katie's own words, and it doesn't line up with what she's hearing from everyone else. Here's what that account actually says, because it's more specific and more limited than a lot of the online chatter about it. Katie and Nolan spent time together on the island, then went their separate ways. Katie back to her friend's boat, Nolan telling her he planned to get back to his. She never actually watched him do it. She's not claiming she saw him walk off toward his friends and get on. She's claiming he told her that was the plan. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. This isn't Katie's word against the friends in the sense of 2 people describing the same 5 minutes and disagreeing. It's closer to this. Nolan told 2 different people 2 different things about what he was about to do. Told Katie he was heading back to the boat, and told his friends, according to them, that he was staying behind with her. Both could technically be true at different moments if his plan changed in between. Neither Katie nor the friends can say what happened in that gap because none of them were there for it. Nolan's father, Elmore, has publicly rejected the idea that his son abandoned his friends for a girl he'd just met, pointing to how much he had going for him that fall. And Ben Crump has been blunter about it, saying plainly that someone in this story isn't telling the truth, and that finding out which version holds up is the point of the investigation. Both are real, on-the-record positions, not proof either way, but a reminder of how much weight this one detail is being asked to carry. Separate from the FBI's official language, and separate from anything Katie has or hasn't said, there's a third thread running through this case that's uglier than either of those. Real people connected to Nolan's death have been getting real threats, serious enough that federal investigators are now involved. Jackson County Chancery Judge Ashley Cole has been the most public about it. Her stepson was one of the 3 boys who made the trip to Horn Island with Nolan. In a Facebook post on July 9th, she said her family had been hit with a wave of death threats, and that no amount of truth-telling seemed to be slowing them down. She said her family would step back from talking to press, but would cooperate fully and privately with Nolan's family and their attorneys, sharing everything they know. She isn't the only one. Nolan's own parents have said publicly they've been targeted too. So, has Trey Seston Shepard, one of the friends who was on the boat that day, he told Good Morning America directly that he and people close to him have been getting threats since this case went national, and that it scares him, for his friends and for his own family. His point was simple. He doesn't understand how doing nothing wrong earned this much hate. The FBI hasn't said who received what, or what any specific threat actually said. There's a real argument that's a responsible choice rather than a withholding one. Naming a victim in an official statement just paints a bigger target on them. But here's what's beyond dispute, regardless of anyone's theory about what happened to Nolan. Threatening a family, a teenager, or a judge over a case you're not personally involved in is a crime, full stop. And it carries a cost beyond whoever receives it directly. Reporters covering this case on the ground say young witnesses who were on Horn Island that day are now afraid to come forward at all, worried that saying anything publicly just means getting pulled into exactly this. There's a pattern worth naming here, because it comes up again later. In a case with this much attention, the gap between what's confirmed and what's dramatic gets filled fast, almost always with whatever version is easiest to get angry about, whether or not it's been checked. That's not a reason to stop covering this case. It's a reason to be careful about exactly what gets repeated and who it lands on next. Step back from the threats for a second, because underneath all of it, an actual investigation is still grinding forward on several tracks at once, and it's worth being precise about what's happened on each one. On July 15th, Nolan's parents sat down with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath for the first time since their son's body was found. Afterward, Ben Crump confirmed what came out of it. Once the sheriff's investigation wraps, the DA's office will hand everything over to a grand jury. Crump was blunt about what he expects from that handoff. Every fact in front of that jury, nothing held back, nothing left out. The DA's office, for its part, was careful to clarify something important. Sending a death to a grand jury in this county doesn't automatically mean investigators suspect a crime. For any death considered unnatural or unexplained, it's the standard next step, not a verdict in itself. The same meeting produced a second concrete development. Nolan's phone, recovered from the boat his friends had been on, will now go through what both sides are calling a mutual inspection. The family's team, led by attorney Eric Hertz and staffed with former law enforcement investigators, will examine it side by side with Jackson County's own experts, so both sides see the same data at the same time. That matters because the family had already raised a specific pointed concern that messages might have been deleted from the phone before it made it back to them. A joint review, done in the open, is built to settle exactly that kind of question instead of leaving it to dueling claims later. Crump has said both his team and the sheriff's department are being flooded with tips. People who say they were on Horn Island that day, calling in with what they saw. Hertz, who's helping run the family's side of the investigation, made a point of saying publicly that, in a case that's gotten this much attention, people on every side try to shape the narrative to fit what they already believe, and that the investigator's job, on both teams, is to cut through that and get to what's actually true, not what's loudest. Reasonable goal, hard one to guarantee once a case has gone this viral. Then there are the autopsies, 2 of them, on separate timelines. The county autopsy was performed July 7th, the day after Nolan's body was found, but the state medical examiner still hasn't released a final report, pending toxicology. Separately, the family's own independent autopsy in Washington, D.C. has also not been made public yet, though Crump says he hopes to share it soon. That's 5 separate processes running at once. The sheriff's department's investigation, the DA's grand jury track, the family's independent investigation team, the state autopsy, and the family's private one. Each has its own experts, its own pace, its own definition of done. A development in one doesn't automatically mean anything for the others, and mixing them up is one of the easiest ways this story gets garbled as it spreads. Not everyone watching this case treats the grand jury announcement as progress, and it's worth understanding why. Former Mississippi Judge Carlos Moore has been one of the most vocal skeptics, discussing the case across multiple interviews since the DA's announcement. His argument, in short, a grand jury referral by itself proves nothing. By his account, this same prosecutor's office has, in the past, taken a fatal police shooting case to a grand jury and come away with no indictment, despite what he's characterized as strong evidence. Whether that specific comparison holds up under closer scrutiny is a separate question, but Moore's broader point is that a referral is a step, not a result. And he's said he intends to keep watching this case closely, so it doesn't quietly stall the way he believes that earlier one did. There's a real counterweight to that skepticism, and it doesn't come from the DA defending herself. It comes from how the process actually works. The DA's office clarified, on the record, that sending a death to a grand jury doesn't mean investigators suspect a crime. In Jackson County, it's the standard next step for any death considered unnatural or unexplained. A law professor at Ole Miss, Ronald Reichlach, backed that up independently, explaining that most felony-adjacent cases in Mississippi go to a grand jury as a matter of course. A panel of 15 to 25 residents who hear the evidence and decide whether it supports an indictment. Both things can be true at once. This can be the routine, expected next step, and this specific prosecutor's office can still deserve the level of scrutiny Moore is giving it. That tension shows up across the coverage. Standard procedure is accurate, and it's also exactly the kind of phrase that can sound like a brush-off to a family still waiting on basic answers weeks after their son died. None of this skepticism exists in a vacuum either. This case has drawn national attention, partly because of a familiar and painful pattern. A black teenager, dead, after a trip with a group of friends who were mostly white, several of whom have since retained their own attorneys. That backdrop is a big part of why Crump, Moore, the NAACP, and a lot of ordinary people watching this case are inclined to double-check every reassurance instead of taking it at face value. Not because anyone's proven wrongdoing, but because in cases that look like this one, trust the process hasn't always been enough on its own. Crump has put it plainly himself. Questioning every institution's role, law enforcement included, is part of what it means to pursue answers as a black family in America. The real test was never the referral itself. It's what the grand jury actually does once it has the evidence in front of it. And that part of the story hasn't been written yet. Before going further, it's worth stopping on two claims that spread hard and fast earlier in this case, because both were wrong, and because how they got corrected says something about everything else in this story. The first was a photo. Nolan, mid-crowd, at a pool party, that started circulating online days after his body was found. The claim attached to it was dramatic, that it proved Nolan had made it off Horn Island alive, that his body had somehow been placed back on the island afterward. Rolling Stone ran it down. The image had actually been posted by a friend on July 5th, but the photo itself, verified down to the timestamp, was taken the Saturday before, June 27th, a full week before Nolan ever set foot on Horn Island. Tracyston Shepard confirmed it directly. He knew about the party in advance, knew Wells and their friends had gone, and could identify people in the photo himself. He just hadn't been there. He'd worked all day and had church early the next morning. The second was a video, and this one's worth walking through carefully because it didn't get corrected in a straight line. Early in the case, even Crump's own team cited a clip from the island in L, which a male voice can be heard shouting about a phone. And for a while, the working assumption, including from the family's side, was that the voice belonged to Nolan. Shepard has since corrected that directly and repeatedly. The voice in that recording is his, not Nolan's. Those were not Nolan's words, he said. They were mine. It's a small but telling detail. People close to this case, working in good faith, got a fact wrong before it got fixed. Both corrections point at the same underlying problem. Rolling Stone has also flagged AI-generated images being passed around as if they were real evidence, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office has had to explicitly ask the public to submit only original, unedited photos and videos, because by the time investigators see it, some of what's circulating has already been altered or stripped of context. Christine has said this plainly herself on Facebook. The internet, in her words, is unhinged. And she's asked the people who actually love Nolan to protect their own mental health by stepping back from it. None of this is a reason to stop paying attention to this case. It's a reason to keep asking every time a detail lands where it actually came from, because everyone's saying it and it's confirmed are not the same thing, no matter how many times something gets repeated before someone checks. Before any of this, before the FBI, before the threats, before a single grand jury ever convenes, there's a young man this entire case is actually about, and it's worth taking a moment to say who he was. Nolan Xavier Wells was a wide receiver, first at Ocean Springs High School, then at Southwest Mississippi Community College, where he'd just started and was gearing up for his first full season. He would have turned 19 next month. His high school coach, Jake Bramlett, didn't lead with his talent when he talked about losing him. He led with his character. Nolan, he said, was the kind of son, teammate, and student every coach hopes to get the chance to coach. Humble, respectful, hard-working. Someone who led simply by how he carried himself. Christine has described her son in almost identical terms, just from the other side of it. A sweet soul who was always trying to lift other people up, who had a way of making anyone around him feel like they belonged. That's the person underneath every headline in this case. Not a mystery, not a set of contradictory timelines, but an 18-year-old who, by every account from people who actually knew him, spent his short life making others feel bigger, not smaller. That's who Nolan's family said goodbye to this week. The service was held Monday, July 20th at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs. Visitation from 9 to 11 in the morning, the service immediately after, and a celebration of his life at the Jackson County Fairgrounds once it ended. Reverend Al Sharpton officiated. Ben Crump spoke. Filmmaker Tyler Perry quietly paid for the funeral itself, so cost would be one less thing this family had to carry. Getting to that church wasn't as simple as it should have been. Days earlier, the commission that runs the Mississippi Coast Coliseum and Convention Center in Biloxi voted unanimously to offer its venue, with commissioners saying hosting it felt like a chance to bring the community together. But the Coliseum is a public facility, bound by state law that bars government venues from waiving fees for anyone. And the price tag attached to an event of this size came out to just over $82,000. That number spread fast online, and so did the anger about it. Officials never said outright whether cost was why the family ultimately passed on the venue. They only confirmed that they supported whatever the family decided. What they did do afterward was put out a warm, unprompted statement thanking the family for the chance to be part of the process, and pledged to light the Coliseum itself blue for the rest of the month, just to mark what Nolan meant to a community that, in most cases, never even got the chance to meet him. That's where this stands tonight. A young man laid to rest by a community that, whatever else is unresolved, clearly loved him. While 2 autopsies sit unfinished, a grand jury waits somewhere down the road, and the FBI keeps working to stop threats against people who were simply unlucky enough to be standing near this story when it went national. Nothing about what happened to Nolan Wells on that island has been confirmed yet. What's confirmed is that a lot of people are still trying, carefully, to find out, and that a family is going to keep asking the question for as long as it takes to get a real answer. A few concrete things to watch for as this moves forward. The state's autopsy is still pending a toxicology report, with no release date yet. The family's independent autopsy, done in Washington, D.C., and funded by Colin Kaepernick's Know Your Rights campaign, is also still unreleased, though Crump has said he hopes to share it soon. The mutual inspection of Nolan's phone, his team's experts working alongside Jackson County's, hasn't produced public findings yet either. And once the Sheriff's Department considers its investigation complete, everything goes to District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath's office, and from there, to a grand jury. None of those timelines have been publicly set. That's frustrating for a family that's already waited weeks for basic answers, and it's exactly the kind of gap this story has shown, again and again, gets filled with rumor faster than it gets filled with fact. Whatever comes next in the Nolan Wells case, it's worth applying the same rule this whole hour has been built around. Wait for who actually said it, not just how many times it's been repeated.